sebentar ini. Belum. Thank you very much for having me.
Hello, thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you, moderators. Good afternoon, everybody. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May I introduce my name, Anas Ma'ruf. I'm a Director of Center for Data and Information, Ministry of Health, Republic of Indonesia. Please share the presentation. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, delegates, and participants. In the first slide, I think in the era Industrial Revolution 4.0, Indonesia has started to develop digital health. Here we will share about big data and business management in Indonesia. We start with Indonesia One Health Data policy. Ladies and gentlemen, I think Indonesia have some of regulation about the One Data Health, about the data governance, IT governance, and also health information system governance. This regulation very important to enhance the good governance in Indonesia, also in our national development. To strengthening good governance is in a mainstream to achieve national development toward SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. This slide shows that we have big data for supporting One Health data. In the era of the Industrial Revolution 4.0, Health Ministry has started to seize big data to support Indonesia One Health policy. At this early stage, big data will be implemented in data management processing that are known as a policy cycle. These management processes are continuous and repeated as required. All data that has been collected in processes and increased its quality and stored in the data lake and then processed according to need. Data processing at the policy cycle began with the process of cleaning data and store it in data mart. The next step of the data that collected in the data mart is data mining and put in the decision support system. Based on the decision support system and policy cycle, health data can be used as an information knowledge, and also even wisdom. Next, this is shown to us that Indonesia has a lesson learned to use the big data for against the COVID-19 pandemic. Indonesia has four main strategies to against COVID-19 with the information system. The first strategy is tracing, testing, and treatment. For these strategies, we use the information system like Silaca, National All Record, Tracing COVID-19 or NAR, Siranap, Search Online, Telemedicine, also another information system. The second strategies is vaccination. For these strategies, Indonesia has a single application. The name is Sistem Informasi Satu Data Vaksinasi COVID-19. This this application contain 4 services like Peduli Lindungi, Pikir Vaksinasi, also sistem monitoring distribusi vaksin, and sistem monitoring imunisasi logistik secara elektronik. The third strategy is health protocol with using Peduli Lindungi is a single platform. And then the fourth strategy is surveillance at the country entrance and genome sequencing with using the quarantine information system, also genome sequencing information system. 4 strategies very important to against COVID-19 in Indonesia. Next slide. The slide shows that we use the 3 main data for the against of COVID-19 pandemics. 3 main data as basis data like certificate of vaccination, also test COVID result, and also the result of the close contact tracing. We use the Silacak for the close contact tracing. In managing the health crisis, big data analysis is used to prevent and control COVID-19. For example, we can use in the slide that we use the 3 basis data and integrated to against the COVID-19 pandemics. So the 3 main data we use to COVID-19 recording and reporting, contact tracing that integrated with Silaca, electronic health alert card, venue check-in with QR code, self-isolation telemedicine, also COVID-19 research and development. Next slide, please. Also, Indonesia has a single platform. Maybe you know that we have Peduli Lindungi. Peduli Lindungi is a single IT platform to prevent and control COVID-19. The Peduli Lindungi contains for some of feature include vaccine certificate, COVID-19 test result, electronic health alert card, check-in history, also travel regulation, etc. All Indonesian people and foreigners can access it. This application also available in another language like English, Chinese, Japanese, and will follow in several other language. This application also using the standard vaccine certificate, and also this application integrated with custom and immigration and could be integrated with other countries. So now we use the Peduli Lindungi as a single platform to control COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, based on the experience of fighting COVID-19, a health transformation is needed. Also, it is necessary to support innovation and use of technology. With the vision of create a healthy, productive, independent, and just society, there are 5 outcomes and 6 major categories in transformation of health system in Indonesia. The 6 major categories are primary health care transformation, referral health service transformation, health security system transformation, health financing system transformation, health human resource transformation, and health technology transformation. For all major categories in health transformation, it is necessary to support the use of technology, including the transformation of health technology itself. Next slide. Okay. This is shown that we have 3 main priority program, like integration and development of health data system, also integration and development of health service application, and also how to make the health technology ecosystem development. And last slide, please. Next. Yeah. This is summary from my presentation that regarding to the big data using, and then for the how to improve our technologies. First, that information technology continues to grow. We must use the health services. And second, require data integration, application system integration, and also supporting ecosystem. The third, digital health regulation must be agile. And fourth, utilization big data is necessary. Also, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. Fifth, health data is strategic data that needs security. So protection and confidentiality is necessary. And the sixth, digital accessibility at all stakes of the life cycle need to be improved. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much hello everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. Hello everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to this panel, very interesting panel. What I like to talk about in my next 7 minutes is about the lessons that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs can draw from the way in which disinformation has been managed during the COVID-19 pandemic, and more specifically, how big data analysis can help with that. So these points that I'm going to mention draw from my research, mainly on European countries, but I think that their relevance is broader in scope. So I think 4 lessons, from Ministry of Foreign Affairs that can draw from understanding how disinformation has been managed in European context. The first lesson is about time. Time is of the essence, and even more so in the case of countering disinformation. So in a study that I've recently completed, I discovered that countries in Europe spent an average of 20 days in March 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, to get a sense of the gravity of the situation. So 20 days from the moment they started to learn that the pandemic has become a problem in Asia, by the time they started to take actions to react more properly. And I think this lag was significant. The slow reaction proved deeply problematic at the time, because it allowed disinformation to get a head start. At the end of March 2019, the first conspiracy theory started to hit the digital medium. And in disinformation research, the sooner you are able to grapple with disinformation, the better. So the question then has become, why the significant lag? How to cope with the significant with the slow reaction? How to make sure that you are actually able to understand the severity of the crisis and to react to that more promptly? And I think here's the lessons, and I think especially when we talk about big data analysis, it's about monitoring information from other countries already affected. And this is where the network of embassies could actually serve as sensors that are able to capture, what is going on in the countries, and this information has to be fed back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for real-time analysis. That's one thing that I've seen in terms of the problems of identifying the gravity, the severity of crisis, and being able to react more promptly, more effectively. A second lesson has to do with the fact that during the pandemic, we've seen Ministry of Foreign Affairs being requested to talk more with the domestic audiences rather than with the foreign audiences. And why was that? Because most of the disinformation during the pandemic was not state-sponsored. As in the previous years, we have attempts by other hostile countries, for instance, to stir trouble, to produce instability through the disinformation in Europe. But during the pandemic, that was not the case. Most of the disinformation was homegrown. We've seen the explosion of conspiracy theories at that time. And we know from studies that in times of crisis, conspiracy theories thrive. People feel confused, they lack certainty. And because of that, they sometimes, these conspiracy theories provide easy answers. So what I think the lessons here is that it needs to be explained what is going on again, in terms of how other countries have coped with restriction measures, how other countries have coped with the vaccination process. So again, monitoring and explaining to the domestic audiences what is going on in other countries goes a long way in terms of being able to counter some or to contain some of the more toxic conspiracy narratives that we've seen. So again, this is an important role that Ministry of Foreign Affairs have discovered, at least in Europe, the need to talk with domestic audiences in collaboration with other domestic institutions and to identify measures that have taken by other countries in order to be able to explain their public and to contain as I said, the conspiracy disinformation aspect. The third element, the third lesson is capacity building through regional collaboration. There was a case, for instance, with the disinformation that we've seen spreading from country to country. It's the same type of narrative, but it reaches countries differently. The one that I'm looking for is at the moment I'm examining is the depopulation conspiracy narrative that is started, for instance, in March 2020 in North America, and now has become quite popular in Europe. So what I'm saying with this is that, regional collaboration can help because the type of narratives that hit you, they already hit, other countries around you. In Europe, for instance, the European Action Service has set up a system that draws on, builds on regional collaboration. It's called a Rapid Alert System. And what it tries to do is to put together, all the member states to share substantial disinformation campaigns, to increase situational awareness, and to design common approaches and responses to disinformation. So having a system that can be fed from different member states, right, from different partners with what is going on, then can give a head start to other members about what kind of issues may arise and actually how to deal with them more proactively before they hit you. And finally, I should stress another important lesson, the fourth one that we've seen, at least in Europe, is a question of collaboration with big tech companies. Disinformation is too massive, and we have to realize that it circulates on platforms which Ministry of Foreign Affairs cannot control. That is a big problem. At the height of the crisis, for instance, in UK, the country I'm based, 50% of UK adults say they said content they identified as misleading information. So what the UK government has done in that case is to partner with tech companies to work together by alerting, by trying to remove some of the more corrosive system from their platforms. Why is that important? Because it tells Ministry of Foreign Affairs they have to do a lot of preparation in anticipation of future crises. And at least, developing, cultivating a strong relationship with tech companies. There are about 20 tech ambassadors around the world. The first one starting, in 2017 with Denmark, but now there are about 20,000 that they try to do this. And I'm going to conclude, just to summarize, what you need to do in terms of, coping with this information. Use embassies, network of embassies as data sensors. Talk with domestic audiences and monitor what happens in other countries. Work with others to build capacity, and don't forget about the tech companies in terms of cultivating relationship with them. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and also distinguished speaker. I'm very honored to be here today to represent the PostLife Jakarta and presenting our portfolio on big data for crisis response. Next, please, can I have the slides? Thank you. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. Please allow me to introduce the organization to you. So PostLife Jakarta is part of the UN Global Pulse, situated also under the Executive Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations, in which we employ a mixed method approach through which it harnesses advanced data analytics to obtain actionable insight from big data. And also we apply service design to better understand the end-to-end processes and resources required for services to run and generate value, as well as for sustainability for sure. And these insights are used to inform decisions and policymaking on a range of development and humanitarian issues, including during crisis. So the lab functions to drive exploratory research, facilitate partnership between and among the stakeholders, and also identifying new data sources and ensuring ethical use of data. Next, please. Yeah, this is where we take some of our experience on the data flow in disaster or crisis settings. We divided the phase into the pre-crisis, during crisis, and post-crisis, in which we can see here that secondary data and primary data also are all interlinked and interconnected during the analytics of the crisis timing. And this is where we thought that a combination of traditional and non-traditional data is really play an important role in the analytics of the crisis itself. Next, please. Next slide. Thank you. Yeah, this is just a mapping of to show as well the importance of data analytics in times of crisis. So this is the use of big data analytics for emergency prediction, for providing and monitoring aid, for example, during crisis, and as well as analysis of recovery plan for sure. And this also applies to the COVID-19 analytics. The examples of some of the works that we have done in terms of crisis, not merely on COVID, that will be explained on the later slides. These are here, and some technologies that some technologies and data use are very various, and also it entails the non-conventional data that I was explaining earlier. Next, please. Yeah, on the HazeGaze, I think I have to agree with Professor Cornelio that the immediate aftermath of the onset crisis is a critical period of time when the humanitarian donor communities need to make a key decision on how to best support affected country. And this HazeGaze was the first platform in Indonesia that combined satellites image and social data to provide real-time insights on potential disaster. It's on fire and its hotspot, I also identified most vulnerable cohorts. It was installed in the Executive Office of the President of Indonesia and later on adopted by other countries like Mongolia for their natural disaster analytics. Next, please. Vampire is the vulnerability assessment monitoring platform for the impact of regional events. It was developed in collaboration with the World Food Programme, and it provided integrated map-based visualization that show the extent of drought affected areas, the impact on markets, and the coping strategies of affected population in Indonesia. And this has served as early warning system to some extent, and it has been scaled up to Sri Lanka and also to other regions as well, like Asia Pacific, as well as Africa, through the WFP or World Food Programme works under PRISM. It's another version of Vampire called Platform for Real-Time Impact and Situation Monitoring. Next, please. And with the Central Sulawesi migration, for example, we sort of like identifying the mobility patterns, and we work with a mobile telecom Digicel at that time. So this is also to highlight the need for data partnership agreements before the onset of a disaster. And we can actually identify internal displacement, and this has been also moving into other uptake and scaling on other tools as well, adapting to other tools. Thank you. Next one. And on mine, this is managing information for natural disaster. We would like to highlight the benefit of a real-time sensing data pipeline that combines various data sources. And this is also to show that better management of information on informing responders following the natural disasters or any kind of crisis with timely insights on affected areas, the need of communities and others as well. And this is to complement existing disaster response tools and can be modified into meeting the specific needs of an organization in order to decide on the intervention towards any kind of crisis. Next, please. In terms of COVID, we basically work with West Java at the time, West Java government through the Jabar Digital Services or West Java Digital Services. And what we did that we sort of realized that the pandemic has brought data innovation to the fore, and much of the demand has been to leverage alternative data of high spatial and temporal resolution. And this is where we combine directly the non-conventional data into the conventional data. At that time, we work with Facebook on mobility data. We use Waze traffic data. Waze is a national traffic data startup, and also the other one is with village potential data. This is an official data from the Central Bureau of Statistics. And it was adopted and integrated into PICOBAR. PICOBAR is the Information and Coordination Center for Disease and Disaster in West Java. It can be used by public. The public can use it in different way that they would like the information to be displayed on. And the insight were used as well for the social restriction enforcement by the Task Force of West Java. Thank you. Next. I guess this is very important. Baseline assessment on COVID-19 reporting. It has been identified a broad range of underlying issues in Indonesia's public data information that are issues of interoperability, data standards, data sharing agreements, and it shows the digital divide within the country and how a different province or different region can act differently and in line with their capacity of addressing or managing information, with their capacity as well to actually undertake the mitigation of the COVID-19 at that time. Thank you. Next. Yes. Yes, thank you. Yeah. All right. Yeah, this is digital diplomacy that we did with the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I think we can go to the next one, the most important one, I suppose. Sorry for the time. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, thank you so much. So the combination of our experience shows a number of aspects to be addressed, like false information or infodemic, public-private partnership, digital divide, transnational issues. And we reflected on this, and various components are interlinked and needs to be addressed. So we think a crisis response as an ecosystem, and these are the various aspects to be undertaken: strengthen bilateral and multilateral cooperation, create an enabling environment, combine conventional and non-conventional data, establish shared value humanitarian data partnership, and also develop data innovation solution for impact. And I thought that in the crisis, what we need to do to mitigate the crisis is actually building resilience. And that's how data innovation can do as well and can be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody, and thank you for the invitation to speak. So I'd like to talk in a more general way than the other speakers about some of the preparation around big data. So, I don't know if you can see the slides. So next slide, please. So the concept of data has broadened over the last 20 years. So now the digital revolution has generated a supply-side data revolution. So now data is made up of sound, of images, of text, of numbers, and this all generates enormous potential. But the growth in data has also been matched by enormous expectations of what big data can do. And I think in some cases, these expectations are unrealistic, and I'll explain why in a moment. So next slide, please. So the growth in data, although exponential and absolutely massive, in some ways gives a false picture of the real data availability. A lot of the tailpipe data is generated by duplicates, by bot-generated data, echo chambers, and so forth. So there's a lot of noise buried within big data. An important consideration from a UN perspective is that the digital divide has created a data divide, and that data divide often hides the most vulnerable and excludes them from our big data sets. And this is very important when we're looking at issues from a global perspective. Next slide, please. And this really is the important thing. In recent years, we've seen a change in the use of language. So 20 years ago, we would have talked about data to inform decision-making. Now we talk about data-driven decision-making, and that's conceptually a very different thing. And this emerges from the growth of algorithms and the use of automated decision-making. Tufekci he describes algorithms as semi-savant mini Frankensteins because of the concerns around what's buried inside an algorithm, because every algorithm is human-made. So I think key lessons for decision makers when they're thinking about the use of big data in a crisis context. First of all, governments need to secure access to data. Often securing access takes time. There's a lot of data protection issues. So waiting for a crisis, it's often too late. And I think this is the point that Professor Bola was making. So governments need to think or anticipate what types of data do they need to secure access to. And so they need to prepare legislation in advance so that they can get access to the data. Secondly, in the heat of a crisis, there's always a tendency, the public, they want answers quickly, but governments need to be very careful in doing that they always take account of good governance. So they don't compromise on human rights and ethical issues when they're using these large data sets. Thirdly, they always need to be skeptical. as I mentioned, big data sets have a lot of biases, a lot of issues. So jumping to conclusions using the data, it's always going to lead to mistakes. So you need to be very careful and interrogate the data. And this is why using data to inform decisions rather than drive decisions is very important. So they need to be conscious of using data, and this often takes time. Oftentimes you need to experiment with the data set for quite a long time before you really begin to understand how it behaves. So using a data set that you've never used in a crisis can often be problematic. Finally, or well, almost finally, I think the national statistical offices should be pivotal to this work. I know we're talking about digital diplomacy, but to me, ministries of foreign affairs are not the appropriate government arm to be doing these types of work. Foreign affairs are not prepared, that generally statistical literacy isn't as strong as it would be in a statistical office. So they're not the appropriate arm of government to do these type of work. And finally, I think as a final message is just be humble. And remember that data don't make decisions, and they only inform decisions. Thank you. Yeah, what I mean is, in my experience, foreign affairs don't tend to have very strong statistical experience or expertise. So they may play an important role in terms of building partnerships with donors, with other countries, but they're not necessarily the appropriate office to do the statistical work. So this is where either you bring in academia or you bring in the National Statistical Office. But I don't think the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are the people that should do the data analysis. I don't think typically that they have the skill sets required.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, sorry, moderator. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for your question, moderators. Yeah, about the big data, I think it's very necessary, very important. We have experience about the data COVID-19. You know that many application, many startup, yeah, that use the application for the give the information to public. So have Ministry of Health also has big data, using the big data to consist the many information, yeah, from the government side, from the public side, also from the another like social media side, yeah. So we compile, yeah, the data to the leak data. Yeah, you know that for the against COVID-19, we use three main data, like test result of COVID-19, also certificate of vaccination, and the result of the tracing of close contact. Yeah. So the three data we use to tracing, tracking, and fencing to against the spread of the pandemic COVID-19. Yeah. So the three main data we use to Peduli Lindungi, and the Peduli Lindungi is one example for using big data to against pandemic COVID-19. Thank you.
Nggak apa-apa, Pak. Ditekankan itu kan dia, ini kan mau di untuk
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the question. I think it builds on the point raised before by Mr. McPhilly about the fact that Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whether they are well equipped, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to deal with the new type of data analysis that is required. And I think the bag is a little bit mixed. Just to give an example, in 2019, the UK Ministry of Foreign Affairs FCO actually established a big data analytical unit inside the MFO. And the reason they established because they wanted to assist decision-making with problems of disinformation related to the war in Syria, and not only. So the point here is that, you can create, and some other units, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, some other Ministry of Foreign Affairs are looking into the same problem, into the same type of institutional capacity building measures. The issue for many is that it's very difficult. You need to have very skillful people to work for you, and retaining talent in Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not easy. So this is one approach. The second approach is to build partnership. As one of the speakers mentioned, you need to create data agreements, to put data agreements in place before, not during the crisis, but before that. Data agreements, I should stress, this is crucially important nowadays. In the context of the privacy related to data management and use. In Europe, for instance, Europe has concluded about 7 or 8 data equivalency agreements with Japan, with Korea, with Australia, so that the data that it collects or shares with other countries could be legally used. So I think there is an important aspect of putting in place measures, partly as an infrastructure, but also in terms of agreements that you need to do. So there is a lot of work to be done, as the other speakers mentioned, before we even think about reaching the point of the crisis. And that has to do with building this capacity now, not next week, not when the crisis comes.
Thank you. I'd like to try to answer these questions. I guess we started with the thing that COVID-19 crisis, it somehow could be called as data-driven pandemic. And like every disaster or every crisis, it is also an opportunity to focus interest and investment. And that includes collecting data from the massive or big or very diverse population as well. I guess I'd like to also address what Dr. Stephen mentioned on how perhaps the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not an appropriate ministry to actually conduct data analytics. I suppose that diplomacy is evolving, things also evolving as well, and during crisis, such information flow, like very abundance, which actually increases in the time of crisis. And we're looking at effective information management, right? And also, I think nowadays, exploring the use of artificial intelligence for a more efficient and systematic approach to information processing, including during crisis or as a crisis responses, also is of interest of the foreign ministries that carry out diplomacy. It's part of it. I think, especially for COVID-19 pandemic, as this is a transnational issues, it needs to have, again, back to the partnership and to collaborative action between and among the countries is also very crucial as well. And to answer to your question from moderator, how we can actually collect data from diverse or big population, we can always tap into the non-conventional data. I think in terms of crisis and mitigating the crisis, we need to be able to be innovative, to be creative, and non-conventional data sources is a way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think the real challenge that faces governments is how to marry different data sets together. So not just big data, but what we've seen is in often cases, big data on their own aren't enough. So the real challenge is how to marry big data with traditional data sources so that we bring broader context to the information. And I think this is back to the points that the previous speakers have made. Governments, first of all, they have to think about why do they want the data, and I think they have to explain that to their populations very carefully. Because populations have genuine concerns around privacy, but there's a challenge between understanding the rights of the individual and the broader benefits of the community. So governments need to think about then the infrastructure that's required, and the infrastructure can be legal, and it also can be technical. So they have to think about storage, transmission, dissemination, but they really have to think around transparency around the communication. Why are they collecting the data? What data are they collecting? What are they going to do with the data? How will those data be used? And I think that's really the crucial bit for government, so that they explain to their population and they reassure their population that what they're doing is proportionate and is justified.
Absolutely. I think it's a crucial aspect in terms of the safety of the data that is being used. The speed of the pandemic forced governments to react quickly. They needed information in real time. And that allowed, I think, under these emergency measures, allowed governments to collect or to harvest a lot of data in order to understand where is the pandemic moving on the health aspect, but also what I mentioned, the question of disinformation, who is spreading it, and what to do about it. For instance, in one case in UK, at some point, the government decided that the disinformation campaign that was started by a hostile country was so toxic, was so problematic, because it was supposed to undermine the vaccination campaign, that they wanted to use techniques that they used in Syria on digital. This can conflict sharply, right, with questions of data privacy. And I think here you need, again, a very clear regime about how data is being used. To what extent the data, and that was a conflict, especially also in UK, because the problem for the UK government was if they deploy these kind of approaches that are used in combat fields, right, digital combat fields, then they are not allowed to do it against UK citizens. They had to navigate quite carefully. As I mentioned, this information is not only doesn't only start from abroad, but it's also amplified domestically. So that type of balance of how to react as something that is being promoted from abroad to something that is promoted by your own citizen, it's a conundrum. It has not been solved properly, I'm afraid, at the moment. And I think even right in UK or in Europe, and I think that is another lesson that we draw from this, how to prepare legislation for conditions in which you have this kind of info war situation that actually affects you. As for the other aspect that was raised before, I think, these kind of agreements have become more and more important. Let me give you an example. So the European Union signed the data equivalency agreement in the United States. It signed it twice. And so that, information collected about EU nationals and transferred in the US jurisdiction for being processed could be done legally. And guess what? That agreement failed twice at the European Court of Justice because the legislation, the national security legislation in the US is not comparable with that in Europe. So at the moment, this is what Europe and the Biden administration try to do, is to come up with the new situations that allow this kind of transfer the data. Data transfer has become critical. And the national security legislation of various countries are not compatible. That's another important aspect. It's not only about the crisis of the pandemic, but we're going to have different other crises in the future. And data transfer are critical to be arranged before the crisis.
Yeah, thank you for the question, moderators. One thing I will say that the issue of the security data is very, very important because with the platform, many platform in Indonesia, the data, individuals' data must be protected. Yeah. So I think for the protected one, we must improve the cybersecurity, and the second, how to make regulation to protect the individual's data. About your question about the overlapping data, maybe in Indonesia we have many applications. We have many platform that collecting the data from the public, collecting data from the government, also collecting data from the another side. Yeah. So in our roadmap, we will build one health system. Yeah, regarding to the data, one health data Indonesia. And in health, it means that we also develop the one health data for the health side. And another side, we also will make simplification the system, yeah, that's conducting in government. So no many system again. This is very important to how simplify the system, and so to simplify the mechanism of the data collecting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's a very good question. I think at the moment we're still reflecting on that question. So it's important to learn lessons from the pandemic. So I guess at the moment we're reflecting on what needs to change, like what lessons have we learned? If we were faced with another crisis, what would we do differently? And I think it comes back to some of the questions and some of the answers that some of the other speakers gave. I think we need to think more in advance about the infrastructure that we need, both legal and technical. We need to think as well about how to address both information to inform the crisis, but how to tackle the misinformation that was disseminated on the crisis, so that there's two separate issues: how to make our data better, but also maybe how to mitigate the damage done by misinformation. We definitely need to think about the skill set. So I'm a statistician, but I think increasingly we see with big data that we need more data science within the UN, not just statistical skills. And we also need to think about the legislation in advance. So as I said, we're currently looking at a new UN data governance compact. And one of the issues would be kind of what legislation do countries need to put in place, either at a time of emergency or more routinely, that allows them to access data, what type of data, how do they share data safely. So all of these issues that the other speakers have highlighted, this impacts on the UN as well, and on the kind of broader global governance discussion. How do we put all of these issues in place to reflect? And just one last thing, in terms of preparedness, I think we need to rethink as well what preparedness means, because traditionally we've thought about preparedness in the context of a crisis that we didn't expect. So an earthquake, a pandemic. But now I think we also need to start preparing for what we know is going to happen. So now we still have the preparedness issues on unexpected crises, but we also have the climate crisis, which at this stage, I think there's compelling evidence that we know it's going to come. So we need to start developing a different type of preparedness response for a crisis that we know that's coming. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I guess it's similar to what other speakers already mentioned earlier, that the law is very much fundamental in this, and the legislation has also needs to be enforced, not also created or prepared. That's the first thing. And on data security, it's something that I have to admit that it's something that we have been advocating for quite some time, and it's not an easy task as well, because of many things, basically. But then again, I suppose this is also in realization of the needs of data and the importance of data during the COVID-19 response as well. I hope that there will be a lot of lessons learned taken away by the government of Indonesia, to be specific, or any other government, basically, in the context of data collection and related to data security and other data ethics that needs to be, to be embedded into the legal or legislation in the country. I'd like to mention something as well that I guess improving data infrastructures will also a key issues as well, because it will also support the increasing need for accountability of the international humanitarian development assistance, as well as a direct intervention from the country itself. So I guess whenever this discourse is raised, and also people are aware of this, especially the government, this could be leading into how data will be more securely used. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I think I started, thinking about digital diplomacy a few years ago. But the more I learn now about the new trends, I think, the right term as we move forward is data diplomacy. Data has become critical and has different facets. We speak about agreements that needs to be put in place. We need about a normative framework around it that has to be negotiated with different stakeholders, domestic and international. We talk about institutions to govern the way in which data is being deployed domestically and internally. But I'd also like to call attention to something that was mentioned also by the speakers. Data, especially the new trends, it's not big data, AI, machine learning. It's getting very technical and very complicated. For Ministry of Foreign Affairs and policymakers, an important aspect is to make sure that there is language by which this kind of technical aspect can be easily translated to policymakers. Part of the reason that there is a decoupling from the way in which data can serve decision making and the fact that it's not being used is a lack of common shared language. Policymakers often don't understand what they are being told. So one reaction to this is that the increased presence and the way of digital, of data, of statisticians in executive boards. So as I think moving forward, I think that will be probably one new concept which I like to explore in the context of crisis management or data diplomacy. And we're going to see, more and more, we're going to hear more and more about how data is actually being, negotiated internationally, as I mentioned before, and how it's being used by governments around the world in an ethical and legal framework, safe legal framework. Thank you for having me. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Nice to meet everybody.